Good morning again. I'm going to introduce the members of this panel. First, to my left, Dr. Maria Fernandez Jimenez from the Colorado State University. She works with farming and pastoralist communities in the west of the United States, Spain, and Mongolia. Her field of work is the sustainable management and equitable management of pastures. She studies the decision making of farmers, collective and individual decision making, and what is the impact of this decision making on the socio-ecological resilience of these pastures. She just started working on the role of women in the preservation of extensive livestock keeping. And she is going to, sorry, on this field, we were going to have Montes Orona representing Orodea. She was going to speak on this topic on behalf of Ganaderas Sin Red, but Montes hasn't been able to make it here today, and she wishes to apologize. To my left, we have Maureen Olivier, who's a farmer. He's a shepherd. He has uh, oxes, pigs, and sheep, and he does transhumance. And he's the president of the Pyrenees Sheep Breeds Association. He works on the breeding for selection of livestock for adapting to climate change and the uh, economic context. He's also the president of the Association in Defense of Pastoralism. And to my right, I have Michel Nori. He comes from Pastres, the European University Institute. He's a tropical agronomist. He studied in the University of Florence and he specialized in rural sociology and he holds a PhD from the University of Van Bingen. And he works on the livelihood of pastoralist organizations. He has worked in Somalia, Tibet, Syria, and Sardinia. Some of his uh, work lines are policies in support of pastoralism, extensive livestock keeping, and particularly in the field of the European Union. I wish to welcome you all to this panel. I will take the floor first. I'm a professor in the veterinary school in the University of Córdoba and the director of the chair on the Ecovalia Clemente Mata organic production, and I'm the coordinator of this project. So I'm going to take the floor to explain to you what were the work lines that we have followed during this project. Thank you. It seems like Montes will be able to make it. I, I already told you that this Life for That project is part of the Life project, um, and it started in 2017, and it's co-financed 60% with a budget of 2.7 million euro, and the duration is 4 years. The period was 2018, October 2018 to today. This is one of the last actions in this project, holding this international project. As you can see, during this time, we had to go through the pandemic, the post-pandemic times, and all the hassle that this brought about. The consortium is created by 8 partners. 5 come from Spain. The University of Córdoba is the coordinator. We also have the uh, Spanish Federation, Spanish DESA Federation, PicChamp Europa, Entre Tantos Foundation, Innogestiona Ambiental, and we have 2 Portuguese partners, Kerkus and ADPM Mertola. And then we have from France the Institut de l'Élevage. Here we have a picture Soon it'll be its fourth anniversary. This picture we took when we started the project. During our break, we're going to take another group picture at the same place here at the entrance of the rectorate. The purpose of this project is to find solutions, adaptive solutions to the climate change challenges in the south of Europe. One of the first actions was to define extensive livestock because um, it's a surprise that um, from an administration purpose, there's no definition, at least in Spain. Um, Extensive livestock keeping is not regulated at all. From a conceptual perspective, there are challenges, and it's mm, difficult in terms of regulations because there is no definition. So we wanted a definition, and this is a surprise because simple picture like this just helps us understand what we're talking about when we talk about extensive livestock keeping. So we started talking about the common challenges when it comes to climate change and extensive livestock. Farmers themselves told us what the issues were, and one of the first things that comes out is water scarcity, forage scarcity, because there's um, more drought. And as a consequence of this lack of water, there's this lack of forage and water scarcity. Even in the north of Spain, the fact that there's not enough snow is a problem. I'm not going to talk too much about it because all these problems are going to be mentioned during these days. To look for solutions, one of the actions in the project was to look for innovative ways of having better storage and management of water. There were two pilot projects, Water Adapt and Pond Adapt. One was aimed at having more water, and the second one was aimed at uh, storing water. We produced three apps for cell phones, one for managing livestock and livestock loads and supplement feed. We also created a calculator, a sustainability and climate adaptation calculator, and a third app to see what the parasite risk was and what the situation of intestine parasites was in livestock and in extensive livestock. About parasites, one of the topics that we wanted to address is the balance, and we want to address pastures from a holistic perspective, trying to recover this good management, and that's why we detected good practices. We worked in 10 pilot, uh, in 10 pilot um, farms, and we looked for the presence, what the situation of the pastures was. We also worked with the Natural Science Museum. Jorge Lobo is here with us, and we worked on the coprophag, coprophagous wildlife. We also um, we consider that working on edaphic wildlife is very important. They create galleries that improve water infiltration. Water infiltration is of paramount importance, and these animals help fixate carbon on the ground, which fosters the mitigation of climate change, which is one of the characteristics uh, that is typical in this type of livestock keeping, carbon sequestration. To avoid the use of conventional parasites, we worked with alternative anti-parasites, um, more concretely, medicine plants, and we measured the carbon emissions coming from pastures and here the pilot farms. Tomorrow we'll visit a pilot farm that joined the project in the last years. There was no pasture improvement, but in any case, since everything is dry right now, it's hard to see anything right now. But we worked on greenhouse gas emissions. We carried out cards of good practices, and we included the feasibility, economic costs of each of the practices that we studied. We worked on 3 business models, locating 39 success stories. We also carried out a marketing campaign
that was organized by a girl, Candelas, as the image of the future of extensive livestock keeping and what it is to get excited about something that benefits everyone, as these videos talk about. And we carried out these brochures that you received when you came in, and there we talk about the values of extensive livestock keeping and what it gives to society. In Portugal, there were campaigns with influencers and people from the high cuisine world. The motto here is farming that takes care of everyone, farming with a future. It benefits everyone, whether or not they consume or they eat their products. We carried out some open trainings, online trainings, and around 1,000 people took part in these trainings, and we will keep. They're still alive because they're in a Moodle platform, so people will be able to access them. I would like to thank Charo Gutierrez, who left us very early in the midst of the project, and she was one of the persons who was in charge of these training courses. She had worked very much in the field of sustainability and in the analysis of life cycles and footprint of livestock keeping. So this is a tribute to Charo. One of the last actions was to work on policies. It's a fundamental for the government to take this seriously, and this shouldn't be just like empty words during the political campaigns and during the political season, because it's of paramount importance to engage the government. And one of the main actions in this sense was to work on the proposal of policies. And we want to finish with a definition, the definition taught by us by Professor Clemente Mata, and that is that extensive livestock farming must be elevated to a higher dimension beyond the productive fact. It produces milk, leather, wool, but we should also value it as a tool for the conservation of the landscape in this environment that we're talking about. In this context of climate change, it's a tool to mitigate climate change. So without any further ado, thank you very much. And as I was saying, I want to invite you to take part in this Congress and to engage in this Congress that will take place in the next day and a half. Thank you very much.
A continuación va a intervenir la doctora María Fernández.
Eso. Okay. ¿Todo el mundo me oye? Pues muy agradecida de la invitación de estar aquí con gente que también se entusiasma por la ganadería extensiva. Voy a hacer mi presentación en inglés, porque sé que hay mucha gente que asiste online, que entiende mejor, escucha mejor en inglés, y tengo entendido que tenéis disponible traducción simultánea. So my theme today is going to be back to the future, sustaining extensive pastoralism in the 21st century. This is a short overview of some of the things I'll try to cover. And what do I mean by back to the future? 3 main points. First, before we talk about the future, we need to talk about the past. How did we get here and at whose expense? And for example, I meant to say at the very beginning, I'm speaking to you from Colorado, and Colorado, the area where I am, are the traditional territories and continue to be inhabited and used and valued by the indigenous nations of the Ute, Arapaho, and Cheyenne peoples. Second, traditional practices are still relevant, and not only relevant, but I would argue essential, and can serve as the basis for new innovations and adaptations. But we do need some changes. for a just, equitable, and resilient future, we need to transform our social and economic systems, and that will require a radical shift in culture and governance. So when I think about sustainability, I've used this very simple framework for many years, and it started with just 3 questions. 1, what are the dynamics and limits of the ecosystem inherently? What is the variability over time? What is the productivity? What is the diversity? Second, what practices, those things we do on the ground, maintain and enhance system diversity and productivity? And third, what are the institutions, the formal and informal rules, norms, laws, policies, customs that facilitate or enforce those practices? And within that, I see traditional knowledge and increasingly more formal monitoring as essential feedbacks between how we learn from our own experiences and actions, and then continue to modify and adapt those actions and the institutions that govern them. And more recently, I thought that this framework was devoid of something very important that also influences everything we do, and that is power. Who wins and who loses. And also, implicitly it was there, but culture. What are the guiding systems of values and ethics that underlie our decisions? So I'd like to talk a little bit about these 5 strategies for sustainable pastoralism, probably familiar to many of you, but these are the strategies which include both practices and institutions that have been the backbone of sustainable pastoralism around the world, not to homogenize systems, they're very diverse, but almost every pastoral system, all the ones I've worked in, rely on these 5 strategies. First is diversification, which spreads risk across different asset classes. And in traditional pastoral systems, a good example is many of those systems are multi-species systems, where different kinds of livestock provide different products and services, and also have different tolerances and vulnerabilities to climate hazards, diseases, etc. The second that we always think about is, of course, mobility, which spreads risk and resources across space. And the iconic example of that in Spain, of course, is Tashumantia, transhumance. Redileo might be another example of that, and many different kinds of mobility at different spatial and temporal scales characterize pastoral systems around the world. The third is storage, which moves risk and resources across time. And that's the idea that often in pastoral systems, you set aside certain areas and don't use them for certain periods of time in order that that stored forage will be there later on during the dormant season or during an emergency. Other forms of storage in traditional system are actually cutting and harvesting hay and feed, or in Mongolia, for example, fattening your animals. So they're very fat in the fall, so they can withstand a very harsh winter. So these 3 examples have to do with assets and practices. And then the last 2 strategies are more related to institutions. So pooling or sharing resources across households within a group moves risk and resources and spreads it out among households. And again, a classic example in many pastoral systems is the idea of shared, collectively held and managed pastures. Often there's other forms of sharing, like sharing of labor. And then reciprocity and exchange is the final one, which are those relationships, social relationships of helping each other out, of allowing people access to resources so that you can rely on them in the future. And a classic example in Mongolia is that if there's a bad storm or weather, herders may have to move out of their own territory. And the territory they move to, that community, even if they don't really have enough to share, will never turn them away, because they know that next time they may be the ones who are experiencing that. There are many other forms of reciprocity and market exchange as well, and a more recent one is, for example, the use of livestock insurance. So one more point is that these strategies are interdependent, and many of them rely on each other. In order to access diverse habitats and feeds, you have to be mobile. In order to be mobile, the landscape can't be fragmented, and so communal land ownership and management supports mobility and the kind of reciprocity that I talked about as well. But as Vicente also mentioned, there are many challenges facing central pastoral systems. I think in the interest of time, I won't go through these in detail, but some that I'll address a little bit more in the next part of my talk are the demographic changes, both in the Spanish context, rural depopulation, and newcomers to rural areas. Policies that discriminate, sometimes against pastoralists, sometimes against certain types of pastoralists, like, for example, women or newcomers. And social and economic challenges, and here I'll focus more on the gender dimension as well. So now I'd like to turn to some actual data and some information from a study we did here in Spain on Spanish women pastoralists' roles in conserving, abandoning, and transforming extensive livestock systems. So this is work I did together with Elisa Otero Rozas, from this university, and Federica Ravera, and in collaboration with Ganaderos en Red and Ramaderes.cat, and with financial support from Fulbright, Entre Tantos, Asociación Transhumancia y Naturaleza. And we interviewed 31 women involved in the extensive livestock sector in 4 regions of Spain. So this is a qualitative study, and then also did 4 in-person workshops with women in each of those regions, and then 2 online gatherings as well. And I'm just going to present a few of the highlights of the results and then refer you to some of our published work if you want more detail. So what is the role of women in conserving these systems? Well, they have done a lot in the past and continue to today. I should mention that the oldest person I interviewed in 2018 was 96 years old at that time, and the youngest person was 22. So we talked to people who had experienced the system across a very long period of time and had participated in a lot of different ways. But so at the household level, women have been key to recovering and maintaining traditional ways of processing products. They're key to transmitting culture and knowledge to the next generation, to instilling those values and pride in the profession of being a pastoralist, and in passing on the operation and the herd. We heard stories of women during the Civil War who all the men in their families died, and they kept the herd and ensured that it passed on to the next generation. And at the bottom of each of these, I have some quotations from the interviews. I don't have time to read these, but they were wonderful and rich interviews. And if you have time to read them as I speak, they're very illustrative. But women also are driving, in many cases, the abandonment of these systems and these spaces. Many of them, they want their children to obtain a higher education. They want them to have more options. They do not necessarily want them to continue in this profession, and they will sometimes discourage other newcomers as well. Some women have encouraged their families to abandon traditional practices like transhumance because they saw it as being incompatible with the kind of family life that they wanted to have. And at the societal level, we know from early on in Spain, there's a skewed gender ratio that women are often the first to leave because of lack of employment opportunities, and even today, services. But women are also playing, this will end on a more optimistic note, a key role in the adaptation and transformation of these systems. At the household level, they have been innovating not only, as perhaps especially in recent times, but not only in recent times. So, some of the older women that I talked to were the first ones to introduce new innovations to their communities, like portable fences and changing of lambing times and things like that. They're often responsible for enterprise innovations, multifunctionality, and value-adding processing innovations. They are beginning to participate more and take leadership roles, as we'll hear from Monte, in livestock organizations, and in recent years forming networks of mutual support and information exchange like Ganaderos en Red and Ramaderes.cat, which our interviews have suggested have really been transformative for some women, especially those in very remote and isolated areas. At the social level, they participate in research, engage in curriculum development and public education, and some of our interviewees even ran for public office on a platform of supporting rural communities and extensive livestock production. Yet, they still face a number of barriers, and I think you can read these briefly, and I'm going to skip to the next slide in the interest of time. At our workshops, the ganaderos themselves came up with a list of their, I translated it in English as requests, in Spanish it would be reivindicaciones, their demands. And these, are demands that not only benefit women, but they benefit everybody in the sector and the society. And they were to educate the public about the value and benefits of extensive pastoralism and distinguish its environmental, climate, and health impacts from those of other forms of livestock production, much like this project is doing. Regulatory changes to facilitate entrepreneurship, professional development and education, especially targeted to women and at times and places that women are able to participate, improving rural infrastructure and services, administrative support to reduce that double or triple burden. So the double or triple burden is the barrier where women are not only caring for land and livestock, they're raising children, they're caring for elders, and they're often doing a disproportionate amount of work in the community for community care. And facilitating transhumance and maintaining the stock drive roads, vías pecuarias. So we've published a number of papers from this. If you're interested, I'd be more than happy to send you some of those, and happy to answer questions and discuss at our lunches and coffee hours. So some concluding thoughts are: to sustain and transform extensive pastoralism, we need the expertise and experience of all types of people, all genders, all ages, all backgrounds. Yes, people from rural backgrounds, but also those from urban who want to move to rural areas. To maintain and build upon those traditional practices and institutions. But we also will need a cultural shift towards a different kind of underlying ethic, one that's based more on relationality, reciprocity, and love, one that resembles more that of some of the indigenous societies, perhaps. And thinking about, as we think for the very long term, in terms of being a good ancestor, not only for our children and our grandchildren, but 7 generations ahead. Nowadays, we often think in terms of what's good for the planet is good for the wallet. That's also a value, but I think we need to move beyond that to thinking about being good ancestors. So I'd like to end with a poem, give the ganaderos the last word. And this is a poem that comes from an interview that I did with one of my shepherd colleagues in the Pyrenees about the future. The future isn't good, the present isn't good. For me, well, I lived the freedom of the mountain, of doing things myself. A shepherd has to invent. No day is the same as another. Don't think, today I will take my sheep up here and then move them over there. It will come out the opposite. And you have to change. You have to change gear, not be of one fixed opinion. You always have to be thinking, because the days change, even in the same place. The days change like night to day. And I think that encapsulates someone. This was an older person, a person who you might think of as, very conservative and traditional, but who sees themselves as someone who is always adapting and changing and innovating. And in fact, he was one of the first people in his towns that stopped being a transhumant herder and built barns. And now his children have resumed transhumance again. So that mentality of adaptation is there, and we have to engage with it and build on it and work together to meet the challenges of the future. Thank you.
Sí, a continuación, muchas gracias. A continuación va a intervenir Maureen Olivier.
Now we're going to give the floor to Maureen Olivier.
Sí. Tengo... ¿Cómo aquí? Ah, vale. Sí, vale. Buenos días.
Good morning, and thanks for inviting me to talk about the process of pastoralists and pastures. I'm going to introduce myself. I'm a farmer, a shepherd in France, in a place in the Pyrenees. I live in Béarn, in the French Basque Country, to give you some context. I'm going to introduce myself. It's important to know what type of grazing I do, of pastoralist practice I carry out. Right now, I am involved in this process to increase the recognition of transhumance. I work in a farm with 250 farms of a local breed, Béarnais. We make cheese, and we also have pigs. It's a local breed that's called Gascon. And ox. We have a local breed that is called Béarnais. We sell everything in direct sales, and there are 3 people working in my farm, and we have 35 hectares. 10 hectares are devoted to growing crops, and our system is based on transhumance. However, the property is very small, so every year we need to take our animals to the mountains to look for grass. So we take our sheep and some pigs to the mountains for about 70 or 80 days. We milk them and we make cheese. There's a specific denomination for this cheese that is made up in the mountains, because transhumance, why do we do transhumance? Because that way we can have a forage, and because this summer cheese has a high added value. We also do winter transhumance with some of our sheep. This is a new project we created a group of financial and environmental interest. So we take our sheep to the vineyards and we take our animals to the north, to Bordeaux. Where I come from, there is lots of farming. There is lots of particularly extensive farming. There are 500,000 sheep and 50,000 cows. There are 1,700 farmers, out of whom 400 people make cheese. So over 300,000 sheep do transhumance, and 100% of the territory belongs to the Natura 2000 network. So we have the three local breeds: the Béarnais, Basque Béarnais, the Manec Tête Noire, and the Manec Tête Rousse. So I'm the president of the three organizations that are in charge of breeding these animals. I am representing Coram, which is a collective of the breeds of the Massif. It was created in 2007. There are five hubs like this in France, and there are 14 entities of selection. Our idea is to promote local breeds and to emphasize the importance of territories and the products that are made with these or that arise from these animals. The first thing that we have started to do with this collective, with this group, is to try to have UNESCO recognize us as World Heritage. We want to be recognized for people to talk about what we do, and we want further visibility. And to do this, we needed more recognition, more visibility. So we have been working for years to increase the recognition of transhumance, and we are now in a process of international recognition and acknowledgement, and we are working together with Spain as well as with other European countries. And Spain and France are a part of our project to be recognized by UNESCO. So with UNESCO, we carried out a plan to safeguard and develop transhumance with 4 objectives. The first one is to work on everything connected to legal aspects, laws, legislation on the territories, to be able to keep practicing what we do. We are also working on the acknowledgement and recognition of our local knowledge that is not included by or is not included in local laws. So this heritage needs to be safeguarded, because this knowledge is what has safeguarded this territory for millennia. We also want to work on training, and with this safeguard plan, the aspect of training will be very important. Another very important aspect is communication, of course, and we also have an observatory. We need an observatory to know and to promote, because to promote something, we need to know how many of us there are, there are who are doing transhumance, how we're doing it. But it seems, I don't know how to say it in Spanish, it may seem something normal or easy, but since in France we're very organized, the problem is that we don't work together. So this is an opportunity to work together, all the different territories where transhumance takes place. And as continuity of this work on transhumance, 2 years ago, when Mongolia presented its um, was presented as candidate to the UN. Um, Mongolia requested 2026 to be adopted as the International Year of Rangelands and Pastoralists by the UN. That's what Mongolia requested, and we supported that request. So in all continents, groups were created to support this candidacy and for the UN to adopt this, for the General Assembly to recognize or to adopt a resolution to declare that 2026 will be the International Year of Pastoralism. So the co-presidency of this group, there will be two presidents. One will be the representative of institutions or organizations that are working to defend and promote pastoralism and shepherds, because without any shepherds or pastoralists, without no pastoralists, there is no pastoralism. That's obvious. So I run for that position because I would love to talk about our lives, our work. So 2026 was declared the International Year of Regionals and Pastoralists. We believe that this is a great opportunity for our practices, for our cultures, for our breeds, because often what we do is not recognized and it's not well known, but we have strengths like sustainable practices. We all know that there are many studies that recognize this. There's a positive impact on biodiversity, but we need to play an important role in terms of food sovereignty. So all of us together have a great opportunity to build something common. We should all together organize our proposals for our extensive livestock production can be heard in international organizations. But in order to take this or to carry out this advocacy work, the whole pastoralist community must work together. The academia, scientists, organizations, politicians, and above all, practitioners, that is, shepherds, pastoralists, farmers. They should know what is happening, and they should know that we have an opportunity to have our voices heard. Our specific object is to request the states and the European Union, the United Nations, as well as, and this is very important, civil society, to request them to hear us. Because now there are many studies, there are many papers that that we can use to have a voice. We have 3 years before the International Year of Rangelands and Pastoralists. It may seem like it's a lot, 3 years, but it's not that much. We have to work together hand in hand. I'm gonna be here these 3 days to talk to you. But we need countries to come together to build this voice and to be able to carry out this advocacy work. Thank you very much. And let's keep working.
Gracias. Ahora a continuación va a intervenir Monte.
Thank you. Now it's the turn of Monte Orodea, that works in Ganaderas en Red and the Association of Young Livestock Keepers from Sierra Norte, which is a natural park from the north of the province of Seville. She's an agronomist, but when her father died, she took up the family animal farm that her family had in this region of Andalusia, and she is a very passionate and hardworking defender of women and livestock grazing. Hello, I'm sorry for coming here a little bit late. It was due to a delay in my train from Seville. I'm very happy to be here with Maria because when she was speaking, I had the impression it was another one of our colleague or co-working female livestock keepers. I'm going to focus on the impacts of climate change on our activity. I should say that Ganaderas in Red are all extensive livestock keepers, and our animals drink from the ponds and rivers of the area and feed on pastures. It is not worth talking about the difference between extensive and intensive livestock grazing here, but there is a drastic change in difference in how climate change affects us. There will be lots of changes in the future concerning temperature and precipitation regimes, and for us those studies are a bit far-fetched, but we do feel the impacts of climate change on a daily basis in our activities. We see climate change not only as a change in the water cycle, which is the most obvious impact that everyone sees. It's hotter, it rains less, but we also see how the ecosystems are being impacted, because we're in very close connection with land and the ecosystems. And we don't only see the changes in rainfall and temperature, but we also see the consequences for our ecosystems. As Maria already said, I hope I can convey this idea, because we see it so clearly on a daily basis. Maybe it's a bit difficult for you to understand how this has an impact on our lives. You have here quotes of other livestock keepers that see how they have to go further and further to find green pastures for their livestock. Then we have another comrade that will explain more in detail. But there's also another consequence, and that is, since there is less rainfall, some are diverting rivers, not leaving the minimum ecological flow in the river. So some of us need to feed their livestock with trucks and water tanks, with all that implies as far as pollution and loss of diversity. We can see impacts on the production, on the hay production. Therefore, we need to buy fodder that increases our operating costs. So we need to go out of our local circuit and look for fodder elsewhere, and that breaks the local cycle of being self-sufficient. Do we have to stop being extensive livestock keepers because we're not able to feed our animals? That's a bit worrying as a prospect for the future. We have members that see that the biological cycles are so much disrupted by the climate change that the lambing season, for example, is changing. They never know when they will go. When the lambing season will start. All those changes affect our animals because our animals are adapted to the environments where they live. They're either adapted to colder or hotter climates, and they have to face those changes. And we see there is an increase in the incidence of diarrhea, and that their organism is not prepared to cope with those extreme changes. Then it is especially the lambs and the newborn animals that are mostly affected, and that implies higher costs of veterinary fees that we have to pay. The helm oaks in our area, where we operate in an area that is mostly with the ESA, that is the Mediterranean oak open forest, and we use acorns to feed our animals. But of course the changes in cycle imply that the production of acorns is also has also changed. I would like to show you a series of testimonies of other members of my association and what they've told me. This is a photo that comes from a member called Nerea from Palencia, and she says, I'm writing this on the 5th of October at 7 o'clock in the afternoon in short sleeves and grazing on stubbles that still hasn't turned green because only 3 liters have rained since the beginning of September. Another member of Ganaderas en Red from Zamora. Those are the photos that she's sending us. We can see a natural spring that should be full of water right now, and you can only see this very little tiny strip of water that is coming out, and also this pond that has been contaminated, that has been polluted by pig slurry from intensive feedlots from the region. This is Charo from Zamora. Now, on a daily basis, when we lead our livestock, we don't know where to find a shaded area. Who understands this better than us, that are constantly looking at the sky, waiting from a miracle? This is Ainhoa from Aracena that is showing us her goats with this completely dry area, in this mountainous area in which wells are drying up, and she's saying that our Mother Earth seems to be exhausted. And this is the feeling we get from observing our surroundings, our environment. This is Violeta from León. She does short-range transhumance, and she she's always concerned because she doesn't know whether one year she will go up to the mountain pass and find no water or pasture for her livestock. These are just a few examples, but just to conclude, I'd like to say that torrential rainfalls, excessive heat, the fact that we go from one extreme to the other in just a question of days, not even weeks, is disrupting our extensive livestock keeping. It is an engine that is getting oxidized, and it is always more and more difficult for us to keep it going. And a colleague and friend once told me we really miss one of those good rainy autumns, and this is the testimony of how we are experiencing these changes as pastoralists that we are, and we hope we'll find ways to keep on there and keep hanging there.
Hola, buenos días a todos y a todas y gracias.
Good morning, everyone, and thank you for inviting me here to Spain once again. I'm an agronomist. I've been working for 25 years in livestock grazing. Firstly, it was in Somalia, and from there I got passionate about pastoralism, and I've been working for 25 years in different areas related with livestock keeping. I'm an agronomist, as I said, and I'm involved in a project called Pastorist that is aiming to study how pastoralists from different areas of the world are facing uncertainty and are developing resilience. And that is a bit of their inherent feature, the pastoralist way of coping with uncertainty. Pastoralists are the ones that, as Monte just said, have to cope with extreme changes from one day to the other, really, and they have more resources to survive. Maybe in Europe that is not so much the case, and that is why I'll try to give you a critical perspective of what is the legislative and institutional management framework here in Europe. As we have seen, pastoralists are make up about 20% of the land surface of the world, and in Europe we have quite a unique situation because it's a situation in which the political framework in theory supports pastoralism. Javier just mentioned that if we start reading documents and legislation from the European Union, we have the impression that there is a great support for this sector because they acknowledge that it contributes to a host of ecological systems. But there is also a very strong narrative according to which pastoralism, including extensive systems, have had to face adverse events and changes. And today, to this, we can add the scenario of climate change. And according to this narrative, livestock contributes to climate change by increasing greenhouse gases and mixing everything, as some institutions like FAO did, implies that you kind of put in the same box those that are contributing to deforestation in the Amazon region and those that are carrying out very different livestock practices. So in theory, policies and legislation supports pastoralists, but in practice that is very far from reality. There are policy briefs in which we can read and that are available in Spanish as well, in which you can read that transhumance is very important, its contribution to preventing wildfires, and it is also true that most of natural reserves and parks are located in pastoralist areas. So there is a constructive relation between the two. Then with the issue of climate change, it is obvious that ruminants generate methane that, unlike carbon dioxide, decomposes much faster than carbon dioxide. And especially extensive systems have an impact as far as carbon storage and capture, unlike intensive livestock keeping systems. So the impacts are very different, but policies have not gotten so far as integrating this difference. Those pastoralists are very different in terms of economic in economic terms, but they're also much better prepared to adapt to changes. Whereas an intensive feedlot is always monitoring the price of fodder or the international market prices, whereas extensive livestock breeders are more able to adapt. It should also be said that pastoralism exists in those areas where there are no other alternatives to produce proteins, or also areas that are more where it is more difficult to retain population, such as in internal rural areas in Spain or in Sahel. The idea that some communities are leaving the areas and traffickers are occupying them, it's changing the geopolitical balance of the area. So this is what the implication is of pastoralism. Their contribution to geopolitical stability is obvious, but it has not been acknowledged so far. Not to mention health implications. Obviously, the health implications in a country like Holland, where you have a lot of intensive livestock breeding, is not the same as other regions. Then there are other contributions. The European Common Agricultural Policy accounts for about a third of the total EU budget and provides a large percentage of the income of most farmers and animal farmers in in the European Union. So there is a very significant commitment by the European Union to support animal health, etc. But in order to have a favorable political or policy framework, we can still see that the results are pretty disappointing. In the past few years, this is a sample of countries, Greece, Spain, and Italy, and you can see that sheep and goat animal farms have decreased in a significant way. We know there is a problem related with generational turnover, lack of workforce, but these in turn are the result of a policy that is not as supportive as it should be, or as it states it is. You can see here that those data are until 2016, which is just before the very difficult years that we have just experienced. In Spain, in the past 20 years, these animal farms have decreased. Those are data that come from Eurostat, by 20%. So 20% of the grazing grounds have been abandoned. And there's also a problem of so-called that we could define as polarization here in Spain that have an impact in the rural environment, ecosystems, and society at large in Europe. Abandoned land is especially in arid and mountainous areas. So this is a process that doesn't occur at the same speed everywhere. Some are being affected more. Those are the figures related to Spain. If you're interested in getting more detailed, you can find them here in Eurostat. And there's also it should be said that most of the workforce used in animal farming is lately migrant workforce. So migrants have contributed to this sector, but there is a generational turnover problem. We have seen what happened in Spain, in France in the 70s, and for example, Sardinians coming into this sector. So, as I said, there is a problem with generational turnover if there is no support from an institutional framework. So, since we have no option to get or generational turnover with no support, there is a large portion of workforce that comes from migrants. You can find all those details in this book that is open access, and so you can download it from internet if you're interested on the issue of migration and agriculture and rural development. This is another publication on the policy framework in pastoral areas of Europe. You can find the Spanish version on internet. Thank you for your attention. We don't have a lot of time, but since the idea is to open a debate, we'll give you the option to ask a couple of questions or make a couple of comments. Marisa on the second row here, but Marisa should wait until she gets a microphone, otherwise we can't interpret. Thank you. My name is Marisa Reich. I am member of Ganaderas en Red, and I am a livestock keeper. In all these debates, I find an issue that is always missing, and that is the health issue. We are avoiding the most important thing. We should take care of our own health. With or without climate change, planet is going to go on. We might disappear like the dinosaurs, but we should start talking about health. I think the European society is getting a bit tired of this idea that livestock keepers are always complaining, pastoralists are always demanding something. This part of society doesn't understand that what they need is to feed on more nutritious and better food. And then politicians and policymakers should also understand that the health implications involve a lot, huge costs for the European Union, and we can only give the examples of all the diseases that are due to bad food habits. We should, in our, I'm sorry, but we don't have a lot of time. There's a very important sentence that this motto that goes, we are what we eat. And we should also understand that we are what the animals we feed on eat. So we should stress this part. Okay, so if there's a very, very brief comment, we can open the debate. Otherwise, we'll go to the coffee break, and then we'll start in half an hour. Please, can you all go out right now to take a group photo, and then you go to the toilets or to have your coffee. So please, you can have your coffee break. There are also posters of the different projects outside, and we have half an hour for the coffee break.